We're going to be talking about pruning fruit trees, and this is a real hot topic for folks. They're really interested in this. And not everybody has fruit trees. I've never grown my own fruit trees, just so that you're aware. But I have done some trainings with how to take care of and to prune those fruit trees. So let's go ahead and get started. There are some key factors that we need to learn and to understand. So there are multiple reasons as to why we prune fruit trees. Some of them we think of as just common sense. Others of them, they really have a true purpose. So we want to maintain a balance between the shoots and the roots. If we have too much above ground growth for that particular tree and not enough roots, that tree is not going to produce as well as it would if there was a balance between that. We want to provide a basic form for that tree, and each of the different different types, such as a stone fruit versus like an apple or a pear, they have their own form. And so we have to make sure that we follow the appropriate form of pruning for that particular type of a tree. When we actually do prune, we actually want to specifically look at where we want that tree to have its new growth. So when you prune something, new growth will actually appear near that cut. By pruning, we also can facilitate our harvesting of the actual fruit that we want off of that tree as well. Sometimes when it's so dense, we can't get to some of the fruit. We want to achieve uniformity amongst that tree so that the fruit is uniform around and through that tree, so it's not just on one side or another, for example. When we prune, we also increase control or management in some capacity of our insects and diseases. And remember, a lot of our diseases are going to be fungal, so if the more airflow through that tree, the better chances are we could have of not having as dense of a population of some of those diseases. We also like to make sure that we have an area where there's a lot of air going through so that when we do spray our trees, that spray can get inside the internal part of the tree as well as on the outside of that tree. We want to produce well-distributed fruiting wood. So we want to make sure that we take off wood that is not viable, not going to be producing any type of fruit. And that leaves us space for new branches to be produced so that they can actually have fruit on them. By pruning, we also allow light from the sun to come in and penetrate through that tree because we do want the light to get to it because it will help it to produce better. It will also have a nice flavor to it as well. We also like to prune because we don't want to have real sharp branches where the crotch of that angle of that branch coming off of the tree or off of another major branch. We want them to be pretty well open. The more they are narrow for those together, they actually have a tendency with bad weather or ice or a heavy load of fruit to actually crack and to potentially break. We want to remove weak, narrow crotches that are there with, as I just explained, as well as any diseased, any damaged, or any unproductive types of wood. So we want to make sure that we prune to remove those. By pruning, we also invigorate and we renew the tree, especially if it's an older tree, then we can invigorate that tree with new branches for new areas where that fruit can be produced. The best time to prune is going to be in late January, early February, but definitely before there's bud break on those trees. First, we need to understand about the graft. So the vast majority of our fruit trees that we will purchase will be grafted trees. So the bottom part is called the rootstock, and that's going to have the great root system that we want for a good productive tree. The scion is the beginning part of that, and that's going to be where we have the variety, the flavor, the appearance of the fruit is going to be on the top. Unfortunately, we may not get both of those wonderful characteristics with just one particular plant, so that's why we do a lot of grafting. So the rootstock also can help to control the maturity of that tree. It also can help to determine the age of when that tree might be able to produce its fruit. It also will help with the lifespan of that tree, how long that tree will actually live, because it can live but not be productive. But then, of course, as all things, it will have a lifespan. Cold hardiness can also be affected by the rootstock, and it also can help with the tolerance of diseases and some insect pests as well. So we need to remember that. We also need to know where on our fruit tree is that particular graft when we go to prune. That's very important for us to understand. Before we get into pruning, we need to look at what are some of the most common pruning tools that we have. And on the right side, we see 4 different types that are there. We have a hand shear, and the hand shear is used when the branches are 1 inch or less, and that is a specific tool. We have what is called a bypass or a scissor shear that will actually snip all the way through that entire branch. Another type of a shear is an anvil type of a shear, and that is not recommended because the sharp blade will land onto a flat section opposite of the other blade will have a flat section, and it will actually could cause the crushing of that particular branch or stem. And we don't want that because we want a clean cut. A clean cut will help us to prevent insects or diseases from coming in. Whereas if it's crushed, there's more openings for that potential of diseases or insects to occur. Then we have the loppers. Those are long handled. They will also be a bypass type of blades. We use that when we have branches that are up to about 2.5 inches. The long and the length of the arms of that lopping shear is good because it enables us to reach a little bit taller, but it also goes to a thickness of the branch, so that provides us with some physics, so to speak, for us to be able to use our arm strength in being able to cut that particular branch. And then we have what is the pruning saws. Those are going to be used for some of those larger limbs that we're going to remove from the tree. Usually, they're going to be some sort of a curve shape on that particular blade, and it's going to have about 7 to 8 teeth per inch on that blade itself. There is an effective motion that we use. So when we use a pruning saw, we actually think of going back and forth on that limb when we prune. And when we prune with the saw, the actual cut part is going to happen when we pull that saw towards us. Whereas a carpentry saw, that motion actually, the cutting of a carpentry saw is actually in that forward motion of when we saw. The folding one, which is my preference, I like that because I can take that handle, fold it over that saw, and not have to worry about cutting myself. And there's a little bit more safety with that type of a saw. There is a difference between the young and the mature trees and how we actually prune them. The top left, that is how to manage the pruning of young trees. And so there is about a 3-year process. We want to make sure that over that 3 years that we have a main area where we're going to have that. We'll remove some of those lateral branches. We can spread those branches out if the nook of that angle is real tight, and there's a special method in which we can do that, and that's done during the summer when those branches are very young and are a little bit viable, and we won't hurt that. In year 2, we want to do more pruning. We want to make sure we have a very good central leader. We're looking at apples and pears in particular here. With peaches, we would do this differently. In year 3, we want to go ahead and prune off some of these lower branches because we don't want them to be that close to the ground. We want to be able to get under that tree, but we also don't want the fruit, once it does start producing, to lay on the ground itself. We want to limit the tree height, so we might want to go ahead and prune out around some of those tip edges. In the long run, starting in year 4, we're hoping that by pruning appropriately in those first 3 years, that we actually have a shape that's more in the shape of a cone, and that will be a great way to get our apples or our pear trees to start being pruned. So what happens if we have an overgrown or a neglected tree, fruit tree? And I've seen lots of those. I really like this particular picture. It has some great design. You can see the different sections with some of the different coloring here of what needs to be pruned off. When we look at these trees, we want to assess the tree, the overall health. We want to look at that. We don't want to prune more than 1/3 overall of that particular tree. So an over neglected tree will take numerous years to get it into its appropriate shape. We want to remove any suckers, and those suckers are going to be the ones that are going to be down here at the bottom. Chances are those suckers are coming below the graft. So if you want this particular variety that's growing up here, you definitely don't want the fruit that's going to come from the rootstock. Definitely remove those suckers. You want to prune out any dead branches, any diseased or broken branches. You want to go ahead and lower the height a little bit with some of these that are going to be on the outside. You want to remove undesirable interiors. So here we can see this is growing upright, this grayer, darker gray one here. This one is growing closer to the ground. This one is going up into the middle, which could be seen as competition for that main 1 leader. So we want to remove that. But remember, we're only removing about 1/3 of that tree. Another branch I would remove in the next year would probably be this one here, simply because it's crossing through the middle of that tree. And that's where that undesirable interior branches would be. We want to also, like this one here, if it's low hanging to the ground, we want to remove that. We also want to remove weak and spindly growth if we have that at all. And again, we're looking at this branch here that has some of those branches that will be coming down and growing lower to the ground. So we want to get rid of that. Again, if you can remove less than 1/3, no more than 1/3 of the tree at any one time, that is what we're really looking for. And again, as a summary, and I really like this picture, so I used it again, there are multiple reasons for pruning. All of them are going to enhance the health of the tree as well as the fruit production of the tree. Make sure you use appropriate pruning tools for the very specific job of what you plan on doing when you're actually using those pruners, those loppers, and the saw. And remember that the young trees, the first 3 years, are pruned differently than the mature trees once they've actually been producing.